Under the harsh glare of airport lights, a black teenager becomes the silent target of a ruthless, invisible force. A force that erases his presence, questions his right to exist, and pushes him to the edge of despair. What starts as a routine journey spirals into a battle against an unseen system designed to humiliate and exclude. Behind closed doors and guarded screens, a shocking truth waits to surface. One that will turn everything upside down and leave those who underestimated him scrambling to reckon with their own arrogance. Who is this boy they tried to erase? And why does the story threaten to expose the deepest fractures of power and prejudice? Dive into this gripping tale of resilience and revelation. If you crave stories that challenge injustice and unveil hard truths, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your voice matters in this fight. Malik didn't like airports. They always felt like places where someone else made the rules, rules you couldn't see, but somehow still broke. The ceilings were too high, the lights too white, and the smiles too thin. Still, today was a big day. He was flying solo for the first time, visiting his cousin in Los Angeles, and he'd spent weeks organizing every detail. His mother had reminded him a dozen times to keep his ticket safe, his ID ready, and his tone respectful no matter what happened. Malik followed it all like scripture. He arrived at Elmgate International with his hood down, earbuds out, and backpack zip tight. His shoes weren't new, but he'd cleaned them until the soles stopped squeaking. The violin keychain swinging from his bag was a gift from his orchestra teacher, and though it often got odd looks, he kept it proudly. It reminded him he was good at something disciplined, something beautiful. Inside the terminal, a stream of travelers moved with practiced ease. Suits, heels, wireless headphones, and rolling luggage all formed a rhythm Malik tried to match. When he stepped into the security line, the first problem hit. A fingerprint scanner failed to read him. Not once, but 3 times. A TSA worker, not even making eye contact, told him to switch lanes. No apology, just motioned him aside like traffic. He obeyed without a word, already noticing how quickly the line behind him moved, how the next passenger was waved through with a smile. He tried not to take it personally, but his stomach tightened. The replacement scanner worked on the first try. At the checkpoint, a white woman ahead of him was allowed to pass without removing her laptop. Malik wasn't so lucky. He followed the rules but was told to open his backpack, remove his charger, his deodorant, his pencil case. An officer held up the violin keychain and examined it like a potential threat. Malik said nothing. He answered politely when asked if he packed the bag himself. He kept his posture relaxed, but each step forward felt more like a test. Once through security, he double-checked the gate number, D12. He had more than an hour before departure, so he found a seat by the window. The terminal's natural light had faded into artificial glare. He scrolled through his phone to kill time, mostly switching between messages from his cousin and news feeds. When he got up to buy a water bottle, the woman behind the register paused, then looked past him to serve the customer behind instead. It wasn't until he made eye contact and said, "Excuse me," that she responded, flatly, without greeting, without warmth. The bottle she handed him was room temperature, though there was a full cooler behind her. He paid and walked away silently. Back at the seating area, Malik found his outlet no longer working. His phone buzzed low battery, and he tried the neighboring plug to no avail. A man in loafers sat beside him, plugged in, and the green charging light lit up instantly. Malik checked again, still nothing. He didn't ask for help. He just sat still, holding the dead cable in his lap like a failed extension of himself. The boarding announcements began. Group 1, Group 3, Group 4, Group 5. He waited. Group 2, his group, was never called. Confused, he walked up to the gate agent and presented his boarding pass on his phone. She didn't even glance at it before saying, "We're processing some technical issues. Please step aside." No explanation, no further instructions. He did as told and watched as families, couples, solo travelers, people who had arrived well after him, were all ushered onto the plane. At one point, a teenage boy bumped Malik's shoulder hard while passing, But the boy's mother reached out and pulled her son away with a tight, uneasy glance, not at the boy, but at Malik. 15 minutes later, Malik still stood off to the side. Another gate worker, someone who hadn't seen him earlier, approached and asked if he'd missed his flight. Malik explained what had happened. The man checked the system, then looked confused. "You're on this flight," he said, but then frowned. "Wait here a moment." The man disappeared behind the boarding door. Passengers thinned out. The terminal grew quieter. The cleaning crew started rolling mop buckets toward the far wall. Malik remained uncertain, watching the digital display cycle between weather updates and airport ads. When the man returned, he had a different tone, slightly apologetic but cautious. "We're having trouble verifying your seat," he said. "The system shows a mismatch. You'll need to check with customer service downstairs." That was it. No fix, no effort to help, just a redirection. Malik nodded, swallowed the lump forming in his throat, and picked up his bag. As he walked away, he didn't see the gate agent look up from her screen and snicker quietly to her colleague, who muttered something under his breath before the two shared a smirk. The stairs down to customer service were dimly lit and echoing. At the bottom, the service counter was empty for several minutes. When someone finally arrived, they took his ID and pass, typed a few keys, and then pursed their lips. "Your ticket isn't showing up in the active manifest," the woman said. "Do you have a receipt of purchase?" Malik showed her the confirmation email. She barely glanced at it. "You'll need to wait for supervisor clearance," she said, before turning to answer a ringing phone, her back now facing him completely. The other passengers had already boarded, and the hallway leading to the jet bridge was nearly empty. There was no more line to blend into, no more crowd to lose himself in. He was alone in the waiting zone. He scanned the room and saw a staff member at the desk still organizing the leftover service items. A cart holding small brown paper snack bags sat unattended. The stack had dwindled, but Malik approached anyway. He waited until the staff member looked up and then asked softly if there were any more left. The woman didn't smile. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took one bag from the top of the stack and handed it over with a motion that seemed half-hearted, almost mechanical. He thanked her and stepped aside. Only when he sat down and opened the bag did he notice it was empty. No water, no napkin, no package bar. Just air and the crinkle of an abandoned wrapper that stuck slightly to the paper lining inside. At first, Malik thought maybe he'd been given the wrong one by mistake. Maybe it was leftover. Maybe it wasn't intentional. But as he looked up, he caught a glimpse of the staff member offering the next bag to a different passenger who had just wandered over. That one was full, visibly stacked with snacks and neatly packed. The man thanked her and turned, nodding politely as he passed Malik. The staff member didn't even glance back. Malik folded the empty bag quietly and placed it beneath his seat. He said nothing again. He found a seat near the window, away from the desk, where he could breathe. The glass was cold against his arm as he leaned into the corner. Outside, the runway lights blinked across the darkening horizon. He watched the luggage carts move beneath the plane he was supposed to be on. At least, he hoped he still was. His fingers rubbed the edge of his phone like a nervous habit. He checked the app one more time, same result. Still on the manifest. Still seat 3F. Still group 2. But the silence around him made the certainty feel hollow. That was when the overhead light above him brightened suddenly, drawing his attention upward. It wasn't the general cabin lighting. It was the harsh beam from a signage arm above, the kind usually reserved to illuminate check-in counters or key instructions. For some reason, it had turned to face him, casting a hot spotlight across his lap and into his face. He adjusted his position slightly, leaning away. The light followed. It wasn't moving, not actively, but the angle had been set deliberately. He was being lit up like a suspect at a table. He looked back toward the desk. One of the staff members, someone he hadn't seen before, stood just behind the counter, eyes glued to a small control panel. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. But when she noticed him noticing her, she looked away and pretended to rearrange a stack of brochures. Malik shifted again, pulling his hoodie further over his head to block some of the glare. It helped a little, but the sensation of being on display didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. People had passed through that gate all evening without issue. But now, after everything, he was the only one left in a seat that suddenly felt more like a target. A cleaning staffer passed behind him pushing a mop bucket and paused just long enough to glance at the light shining down. He hesitated, then looked at Malik, then kept walking without a word. Malik felt it. The message wasn't spoken, but it was clear. He didn't belong here. Not in that seat. Not in that space. Not even in the cone of that light. The subtle recalibration of power, the snack bag, the dismissive service, the changing light, all whispered the same thing. You are visible, but not welcome. He should have moved. Should have asked someone to adjust the beam. But he didn't. He couldn't. Speaking up now, after everything, might make it worse. Might label him as difficult, disruptive, or worse, angry. That word always stuck in his throat. No matter how composed he stayed, no matter how softly he spoke, people heard anger where there was none. So he sat. He stayed in that beam, hot against his skin, his eyes squinting, the back of his neck tensing as if waiting for the next thing. The unspoken rules weren't written on any sign, but they filled the air around him like smoke. They dictated which mistakes would be excused, who would get help first, and who would be ignored until they gave up and went away. He plugged it into the outlet just beneath the seat. For a moment, the screen brightened, and the charging icon appeared. He let out a slow breath, one he hadn't noticed holding. But not even 30 seconds later, the screen dimmed again. He checked the plug, the cord, the port. Everything was secure, but the battery icon sat still, the red line mocking him. No power. He unplugged it and plugged it back in, nothing. He leaned down and tried the secondary port beside it, still nothing. With cautious optimism, he glanced at the man in the tailored gray suit now seated to his right. The man plugged his own phone into the exact same outlet Malik had just used. Instantly, the LED charging ring lit up blue, casting a soft glow across his fingers. The man never noticed Malik watching. He was already engrossed in his device, scrolling through emails or texts without a care. Malik looked away before the other man could notice. He coiled his charging cable slowly, methodically, and tucked it back into his bag. He said nothing. Again, the weight of being forced silent, not by rules, but by risk, tightened around him. The seat, once just uncomfortable, now felt deliberately placed. He wasn't sitting in a public space. He was trapped in a zone of increasing precision. Every tool, every system, every interaction calibrated to disqualify him from normalcy. The light, the snack bag, the lack of boarding announcements, and now a dead outlet that was only dead for him. He started to stand, perhaps to stretch, or maybe just to shift the current of humiliation that clung to him. That's when he noticed them. 3 uniformed airport staff moving in a slow arc through the terminal. They weren't TSA, not quite security, but wore navy jackets with laminated ID tags swinging from their collars and radios clipped to their belts. They moved in sync, casual in posture, but targeted in motion. Their eyes skimmed the few remaining passengers in the area. Then they fixed on Malik. He knew it before they approached. It was the same look he'd gotten in department stores back home when a security guard decided he was browsing too long. It was the slow straightening of posture, the half-tightened jaw, the soft pinch of a radio mic. The lead staffer approached with a clipboard in hand, the other 2 fanning out just slightly behind. Malik remained still, seated, hands visible. The lead leaned down slightly, not enough to threaten, but close enough to command presence. He didn't introduce himself. Instead, he looked directly at the AirPods in Malik's ears and asked what he was listening to. The question was casual in tone, but sharp in purpose. Malik removed the earbuds slowly. No music was playing. His phone was dead. He said so. The lead nodded slightly, then asked to inspect them. His reason came with a slight twitch of the lips, a hint of amusement under the official request. "We've had reports," he said. "There are certain devices designed to intercept signals. We just want to make sure everything checks out." Malik handed them over without protest. He wasn't sure if refusing would escalate things, but he was certain of what compliance would cost: another piece of dignity. The lead took the AirPods, turned them in his hands, then passed them to the second staffer, who examined them like counterfeit bills. The third wrote something on the clipboard. They didn't ask to see anyone else's devices. No one else in the terminal was questioned. Malik glanced toward the gate desk. The agent on duty was staring in their direction, but made no move to intervene. The second staffer handed the earbuds back after a minute, nodding once, no apology, no thanks. Just a silent end to a baseless inspection. The group turned and moved on, leaving Malik holding his AirPods like they were something foreign. The feel of them in his palm had changed. They no longer felt like tools for comfort or privacy. They felt like evidence. Malik didn't put them back in. He held them for a few seconds, then dropped them into his backpack without looking. He sat again, slower this time, his body folding slightly inward, as if the air itself was pressing down. He stared at the dead phone screen, watching his own reflection in the black glass. Behind that reflection, the gate remained quiet. The jet bridge door was still closed. The terminal had fallen into a strange silence, not peaceful, but tense, as though holding its breath, waiting for something else to go wrong. The man next to him, still charging his phone, got up and left a moment later, his gate having opened. He said nothing to Malik, just walked away, his cord coiled neatly in his hand. Malik watched the blue LED fade with his departure, leaving only the overhead glare and the soft ambient airport hum. He tried not to feel paranoid, but the pattern was too tight, too consistent to be coincidence. The empty snack bag, the redirection at security, the boarding group that was never called, the targeted inspection, the outlet that worked for others but not for him. Each action by itself might seem like a glitch, a bad day, a minor oversight. But together, they formed a narrative, a slow-motion effort to separate, isolate, and exclude. The silence of it was the loudest part. No raised voices, no public accusations, just a series of quiet, precise gestures that carved out space around him, a space no one else seemed willing to enter. He felt like he was becoming invisible and hypervisible at once, ignored until it was convenient to target, unseen until it was useful to spotlight. But the pattern so far left little room for comfort. He had done everything right, yet everything was going wrong in subtle, suffocating increments. The fluorescent light above still glared over his seat, and the staff at the gate desk had rotated again. A new attendant now typed lazily into her monitor, completely ignoring Malik, who had, by this point, become a fixture in the space, like the furniture, visible but unacknowledged. The terminal had thinned out. There were no lines, no bustle, no new passengers arriving. It felt like the airport had paused, except around him. From the left, the sound of rubber wheels squeaking on linoleum pulled Malik's attention. A janitor pushed a wide, battered cleaning cart, its top stacked with spray bottles, rags, and a mop that leaked slightly from its handle. The man maneuvered slowly, carefully, sweeping through the walkway like he'd done it 100 times. As he neared Malik's chair, he veered slightly, just enough for one of the spray bottles to slip forward and drop. The bottle landed on its side, rolled once, and bumped into Malik's right shoe. A sharp splash of cold, chemical-scented liquid burst out from the cap, spreading across the top of both sneakers. Malik flinched and stood immediately, backing up as the disinfectant stained the canvas black before drying into smeared white crust. The janitor didn't stop. He picked up the bottle, barely glanced at Malik's shoes, and continued pushing his cart like nothing had happened. No apology, no acknowledgement, not even eye contact. The sharp scent of ammonia lingered, clawing into Malik's nostrils. He looked down at his ruined sneakers, now etched with pale streaks that wouldn't wash out. He wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand an answer, but his throat held back the words. It wasn't about fear. It was about futility. He had already been made invisible. Speaking now would only make him seem aggressive, or worse, unstable. So he sat again, wincing as the disinfectant soaked through his socks. The cold sting crept in around his toes, sharp and uninvited, adding another layer to the day's accumulation of quiet abuse. Each act, on its own, was defensible, mistaken, accidental, but together they painted a portrait of intent, of targeting, of erasure by 1,000 small humiliations. He wiped at the stains with the inside hem of his hoodie, but the fabric only spread it further. The patches on his shoes now looked like chalk outlines. A boy waiting to be outlined himself. Sometime later, an announcement echoed through the terminal, but it wasn't for his flight. A gate change had been issued for a different departure, and a stream of travelers trickled past him toward gate D14. Malik stood, not because of the announcement, but because his body could no longer sit still beneath that unrelenting light, the ruined shoes, and the weight of so much passivity. He decided to walk toward the small cafe near the end of the terminal to at least get water or napkins to clean up. Every time he stood to reclaim space, something knocked him back down, not with force, but with something more insidious. Indifference wrapped in procedure. When he finally returned to gate D12, it was quieter than before. The staff member at the desk had changed again, replaced by a younger man in a blue vest, whose face barely flickered when Malik approached. The gate's overhead screen rotated through flight information. Malik glanced up, half afraid of what he'd see, and felt a jolt pierce through his chest. His name wasn't there. The boarding list, previously cycling through assigned passengers and their groups, now ran alphabetically without him. The seat numbers moved past 3F like it never existed. Group 2 had been marked as completed. He stared harder, convinced he had missed it, but after a full loop of the names, his was simply gone. He pulled out his phone, reopened the Airline app, and checked again. His QR code was there. Seat 3F. Flight confirmed. Time unchanged. He held the screen up, hesitated, then approached the counter again. The staff member didn't look up at first. When Malik quietly said, "Excuse me," the man glanced up from his terminal with the kind of impatience reserved for people already assumed to be wrong. Malik showed the phone, keeping his voice level. "My name isn't showing on the list," he said, "but I have the ticket right here. Can you check it again?" The staff member took the phone, glanced at it, tapped a few keys, and narrowed his eyes slightly. "Strange," he muttered without commitment. Then he turned the screen slightly toward himself and said, "This says confirmed, but our system doesn't show your boarding pass as scanned." Malik blinked. "I never got the chance to scan it," he said. "Earlier, I was told to wait. I've been here the whole time." The man shrugged with professional apathy. "Yeah, but now the flight's been updated. System may have cleared inactive entries. You'd have to go to customer service again to get it reissued." Malik stared at him, heart racing but hands still. "Is the flight already boarding?" he asked. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked past Malik toward the hallway, then turned back and said, "Best to go check downstairs. We can't issue anything from this terminal if the pass expired in the system." Expired? The word hit like a shove. He hadn't moved from the terminal. He hadn't been late. He hadn't violated any policy. And yet he was being asked to leave the gate, to descend again into the bureaucratic abyss that had swallowed him once before. Malik's mouth opened, but no protest came. Instead, he turned slightly, stepping back from the desk, his fingers curling around the phone like it was the only proof he had that he existed in their system at all. He looked around, scanning the terminal. There were now fewer than 10 people near his gate, most of them staff. Then something caught his eye, movement from the side, quick and subtle. A staff member near the far wall, dressed in the same airline uniform, but off duty, perhaps waiting for a transfer, held up their phone and pointed it directly at Malik. Not overtly, but at an angle that didn't make sense for a selfie or a text. The sound of the staff's quiet laughter still echoed in his mind, but the sting of humiliation had started to shift into something colder, deeper, numbness. He rose slowly, not sure what he intended to do, but driven by the aching instinct that staying still any longer might suffocate him. He headed toward a large digital map display near the center of the terminal, hoping to find the customer service center, still clinging to a threadbare hope that someone, somewhere within the walls of this structure, might actually help. The map was touch-based and lagged slightly as he tapped around. When he entered his flight number into the search bar, a bright yellow line blinked and pointed left. down the terminal, past the gate desk, toward a set of sliding doors beneath a large sign that read Assistance and Accessibility Services. Malik paused, squinting. That wasn't what he had searched for. He tapped again, re-entered the information. Same result. The system, for reasons unclear, was directing him not to standard customer service, but to the Special Assistance Center. He looked around to confirm, but the few attendants he might have asked had all turned their attention away or wandered off in different directions. With no better option, and unwilling to sit again like an ignored statue, Malik followed the sign. The corridor narrowed, the noise of the terminal softening behind him as he entered a quieter space lined with padded benches and a long desk with 2 employees seated behind it. He approached slowly, clutching his phone, preparing once again to explain, justify, plead. Before he could say anything, one of the women behind the desk looked up, smiled brightly, and started clapping. 2 short, cheerful bursts that echoed in the quiet room like slaps. "Hey there," she said, still smiling. "We're so proud of you for finding the right place." Malik blinked. The words made no sense at first. She stood and walked around the desk, holding a folder in her hands, and only then did he register the look in her eyes. Not professional, not empathetic, but condescending. The kind of tone used with toddlers or the cognitively impaired. "I'll help you get all checked in," she said slowly, as if speaking to someone struggling to understand. "Do you have your name badge or support card with you?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. The insult landed before he could shield himself. She thought he was lost, or slow, or broken in some way. His throat tightened, the blood rushing in his ears, making it hard to think. He started, then stopped. The second staffer looked up now, brow raised. "You're here for assisted mobility support, right?" Malik opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the first woman placed the folder into his hands and patted his arm gently, like he was a child doing something brave. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything's inside. We know sometimes these spaces can get confusing, especially with the gate changes. We'll make sure you get where you need to go." Still silent, Malik looked down at the envelope in his hands. It was sealed in cheap paper, a printed label on the front that read Mobility Support Voucher Tier 4. He opened it slowly, each motion mechanical, his fingers numb. Inside was a flimsy printed card that offered a $25 discount on future coach flights, along with a small note. "Thank you for understanding your tier. We appreciate your patience as we serve higher boarding groups." He stared at the words, rereading them twice, 3 times. Understanding your tier. Higher boarding groups. It wasn't just a misclassification. It was a message. When he finally looked up, the first woman was back behind the desk, smiling at him like a teacher waiting for a student to react to a gold star. The second had returned to her tablet, making notes. Neither of them looked at Malik as a passenger with a ticket. They saw him as something else entirely. He stood there, motionless, the voucher hanging limply at his side. There was a moment, a flash, when he imagined tearing it in half, slamming it on the desk, shouting. But he didn't. He had tried every option he could think of, approaching customer service, revisiting the gate multiple times, seeking out supervisors, even quietly pleading with different employees for clarity. But every attempt was met with a wall of silence, averted gazes, or thinly veiled disdain. The quiet humiliation of being ignored had morphed into an exhausting weight on his chest. Every step he took felt heavier. Each corridor seemed longer. Every glance he caught from passing staff and travelers felt like a judgment rendered in silence. As he passed through a nearly deserted corridor lined with sleek glass walls and polished floors, a janitor entered the scene. Malik noticed the man as he turned the corner, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. The man paused near a recently wiped area, then flicked a spray nozzle into the air, a fine mist of sanitizer drifting across the hall. The mist hovered briefly, sparkling faintly in the terminal's dim light, before settling. Malik caught a sharp scent of chemicals and instinctively pulled his hoodie tighter over his head. The janitor, however, made no move to steer the spray away from him or to pause while Malik passed. The mist sprayed directly into Malik's path, surrounding him with an invisible haze of sterilizing liquid, as if he were a contaminant to be cleansed. Malik coughed quietly but said nothing. No one else was in the corridor. No one else was being sprayed. The gesture was subtle, but the message was clear. He was not welcome in this space. After leaving the corridor, Malik moved slowly back toward the main terminal area near the boarding gates. The digital screen still displayed flight information for numerous departures, and the low murmur of airport announcements buzzed intermittently. When the gate announcements for boarding began, Malik straightened his posture, ears straining to catch his group's call. He heard Group 1, Group 3, Group 4, and even Group 5 echo through the terminal. Passengers rose and gathered their belongings, lining up to enter the aircraft through the jet bridges. But there was no call for Group 2, no announcement, no mention of his seat or boarding pass. He approached a nearby staff member who was folding newspapers behind a counter. Without raising her eyes, she indicated with a careless gesture toward a locked door next to the gate, one marked Authorized Personnel Only. Malik asked quietly if that was the boarding gate, and the woman shrugged. "Nope," she said flatly. "That door's locked. You're not getting in through there." Malik's throat tightened. He tried to explain that he had a boarding pass for this flight, that his name had been confirmed repeatedly on his phone, that he'd been standing here, waiting for hours. The staff member shook her head without conviction, returning to her task. Nearby, the crowd had mostly thinned. Passengers queued eagerly at the gates that were boarding, many unaware of the invisible struggle unfolding just feet away. Malik turned his gaze back toward the locked door and then to the digital display above it. His name still absent. No new updates were posted. No reassurances offered. The terminal felt like a maze with no exit, an airport without a gate for him. He paced in small circles, heart pounding. The weight of invisibility settled over him again, but now it was accompanied by a hollow ache of rejection. Yet beneath it all was something stronger, something steady. Resolve. Pulling his laptop from his backpack, Malik found a quiet corner where the glare of overhead lights softened and settled into a low bench. His fingers moved swiftly, practiced. The screen lit up with a familiar command line interface, the kind used by technicians and operators behind the scenes in airports and airlines. No one in the terminal paid him any mind. To them, he was just another lone traveler waiting to be forgotten. But Malik's access wasn't accidental. Months ago, through connections from his Aunt Layla Travers, an influential figure behind many of the airport's operational contracts, he'd been given limited clearance to monitor gate systems remotely. It was meant for emergencies or maintenance checks, but today it was his last tool of defiance. The console loaded, and Malik navigated through multiple encrypted menus until he reached the Meridian Gate Operator console. The interface displayed real-time information about gate assignments, boarding statuses, passenger manifests, and most importantly, system controls for public displays. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes flicking over rows of data that had frustrated him all day. His name missing, his seat reassigned, his boarding group erased. With deliberate keystrokes, Malik accessed the public display controls for Gate D12. He bypassed standard permissions with credentials he was reluctant to use, knowing full well the risk if discovered. Then, with a few final commands, he replaced the standard flight information screen with a custom image. The official logo of the Travers Contract Group emblazoned boldly across the screen. Below it, a line of text appeared in crisp white letters against a dark background. This gate powered by the Travers Contract Group, a Layla Travers partnership. He stared at the screen he had commandeered, a faint but genuine smile breaking through the exhaustion etched on his face. The terminal buzzed quietly around him, but now something had shifted. A few travelers at neighboring gates stopped to glance toward the newly changed display. Their murmurs spread quickly. "Did you see that? Since when does that gate show a different logo?" Across the terminal, airline staff gathered near the screen, their faces turning pale as they realized the message was no accident. Malik closed the laptop gently, packing it away with a newfound lightness. He stood, steadying himself against the wall, feeling the weight of hours of invisibility start to lift. The subtle power of his aunt's name and influence had become his shield and sword, and he was no longer just a forgotten passenger. he was a statement. Staff members scurried to contact supervisors, whispered into radios, and exchanged tense glances. Whispers of a contract holder and management intervention spread like wildfire through the terminal. Malik's phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from his Aunt Layla. "We're on our way. Hold tight." For the first time that day, Malik didn't feel alone. His isolation had been pierced by a quiet revelation, and the tide was beginning to turn. The locked door behind him suddenly seemed less like a barrier and more like a challenge about to be broken. The alert that pinged across every staff member's device was succinct but loaded with urgency. Contract holder en route. Immediate compliance requested. It was the kind of message that sent ripples through an organization. A command from the top, a reminder of power dynamics that could no longer be ignored or circumvented. Airport employees, who had been confidently indifferent moments before, found their professional facades cracking. Jackets were straightened as nervous hands loosened tight collars and untied stiff neckties. Identification badges were discreetly tucked inside pockets or behind desk papers, as if hiding credentials might shield them from scrutiny. Desks once piled with paperwork were hastily cleared to make way for something official, something inevitable. Behind the scenes, phone calls buzzed rapidly between departments, security teams scrambled to coordinate, and supervisors convened in hushed clusters. The name Travers was no longer just whispered. It was announced with a kind of reverent fear. Layla Travers arrived in the terminal with quiet authority. She wore a black blazer cut sharply to her frame, the fabric smooth and matte, paired with matching trousers that clicked softly against the tile floor. Her gold-rimmed glasses caught the overhead lights, reflecting a keen intelligence and a reputation that preceded her. Two legal representatives flanked her, stoic figures in navy suits with briefcases that suggested prepared arguments and detailed dossiers. Layla's presence was not loud or confrontational. It was deliberate and commanding. She moved through the terminal with the confidence of someone who owned more than just contracts, someone who held the keys to the whole operation. Staff parted instinctively, their previous nonchalance replaced by anxious compliance. No one attempted to block her path or question her presence. Instead, they whispered among themselves, their eyes darting nervously toward their phones and each other. Layla approached Gate D12, where Malik had been held in limbo. The public display still bore the logo of the Travers Contract Group, a visible symbol of the partnership she represented. She laid a large, sealed envelope on the gate counter. The document was stamped boldly with the words "Breach Report" in red ink, its contents evidently serious and formal. She did not speak. There was no need. Her expression conveyed more than words could, a silent assertion of authority and the consequences awaiting those who had ignored or mistreated the rightful holder of this contract. Malik stood nearby, feeling the magnitude of the moment settle over him. The exhaustion of the day's humiliation began to ebb, replaced by a cautious hope. His aunt had arrived not just as a family member, but as a force demanding accountability. Around them, the staff gathered uneasily. Those who had been part of the dismissive, exclusionary actions avoided eye contact, some nervously adjusting their uniforms or shifting their weight. The gate agent who had refused to acknowledge Malik earlier now busied herself with rearranging brochures and avoiding the central space. The airport manager stepped forward, a tall man with a neutral face that betrayed little, but held a weight of responsibility. He extended a hand to Layla and whispered a brief apology, the kind of wordless concession that spoke volumes. The legal representatives began reviewing the breach report with the manager, discussing timelines, violations, and remedial actions. The quiet hum of business was no longer casual but urgent. Malik observed it all, the shift from indifference to submission. The invisible walls that had confined him cracked open. The atmosphere that once stifled him now buzzed with a new energy. The reckoning of privilege confronted by power. Around the terminal, passengers noticed the change too. Staff who had once ignored Malik began offering subtle gestures of apology, some tentative smiles, others mere nods of respect. A few whispered among themselves about the name Travers, recognizing its significance in the airport's operation and the industry at large. The power dynamics had realigned, not through anger or chaos, but through deliberate intervention and undeniable truth. Malik felt his own posture straighten, his gaze steady. The transformation of the terminal was swift but profound. Following Layla Travers's intervention, the atmosphere shifted from one of subtle exclusion to open reckoning. Airport management had convened emergency meetings, reviewing footage, employee records, and complaints with laser focus. The staff who had treated Malik with disdain and neglect now faced the consequences of their actions, not through public spectacle or harsh words, but through a quiet and unmistakable shift in authority. One by one, those responsible were summoned to the manager's office. The senior staffer who had overseen the gate during Malik's ordeal was the first to leave. Without fanfare or protest, she was instructed to remove her name tag, hand over her identification badge, and exit the terminal. No announcements were made to the waiting passengers, but whispers quickly spread among the remaining employees and travelers alike. The message was clear: behavior that compromised the integrity of partner-controlled zones would not be tolerated, regardless of seniority or tenure. Malik watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of vindication, but also with a deep awareness of the journey yet ahead. The humiliation he endured had been undeniable, but so was the power of accountability brought by unwavering resolve and the support of those who refused to let injustice persist. As the dismissed staffer walked through the terminal, heads turned. The same passengers who had ignored Malik earlier now stared, some with regret, others with quiet approval. The sharp contrast between past neglect and present consequence was not lost on anyone. Malik, meanwhile, was escorted by airport security and Layla to a private lounge reserved for VIP guests and corporate partners. The lounge was a sanctuary of warmth and calm, bathed in soft amber lighting that seemed to embrace rather than spotlight. Plush chairs lined the walls, and quiet conversation hummed in the background. Malik felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the tension slowly uncoiling from his body. The birthmark on his cheek, a unique and defining feature he had often wished to hide, now seemed to glow under the gentle lights, not as a flaw, but as a symbol of identity and strength. Layla sat beside him, offering a reassuring smile. No words were necessary. The presence alone spoke volumes. Malik was no longer alone in this fight. When the time came, Malik was led through a private jetway that bypassed the public gates and crowds. The sleek glass corridor shimmered under soft LED lights, guiding him toward the airplane with an almost ceremonial grace. Staff greeted him with professional warmth, their manner starkly different from earlier. Passengers on the main jet bridge, many of whom had seen Malik as an inconvenience or an invisible presence, now turned their heads as he passed. Their eyes widened, some shifting uncomfortably, others whispering to companions. It was too late for apologies, too late to undo the hours of disregard. Malik walked steadily, his back straight, shoulders squared. The invisible barriers that had confined him so long had been dismantled. The airport terminal, once a gauntlet of silent exclusion, had become a testament to the power of justice, quiet, unyielding, and finally seen. As the plane door closed behind him, Malik took a deep breath, looking out the window at the terminal receding below. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but the triumph was undeniable. The fight against discrimination was far from over, but today had proved one undeniable truth. Dignity could not be erased, and justice, when demanded, would always find its way. The end. Thanks for reading this story all the way through. If you found Malik's journey powerful or thought-provoking, please consider liking and subscribing to stay updated on more stories like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the plot stood out to you the most? Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. Your voice matters, and your perspective helps bring these stories to life.